there. So that was me playing my transcription of Jesse Van Ruler's solo of Secret Chant, one of his tunes. There are several recordings, I think, of this tune, or at least two. One is on an album called, I think, Circles, with Seamus Blake. And this is the solo I have transcribed, or as they say in Canada, lifted. As always, when I lift a solo, I try to do it so that I can learn from it. And I'm going to show you now how you can take some of these ideas, licks, or things that you kind of like about a solo and try to incorporate it into your own playing. Somebody asked me if I could make a video on how I transcribe solos. I wasn't sure how to do that, but I can talk a little bit about why I transcribe solos. Some teachers say that you should never transcribe solos because then they're afraid you're gonna end up sounding like the player. Then there are other teachers who say the only thing you need to do is transcribe solos. Then there's the question of, should I transcribe licks or a whole solo? Here I transcribe the actual whole solo. The good thing about that is that you kind of get inside the head of that player, especially if you transcribe a lot of solos from the same player. And they kind of, you learn how they build solos. That's something that is missing in a lot of jazz teaching material. The idea of building an interesting solo over several choruses. But anybody who has ever been on a jazz gig knows that that's a very important thing. But then again, I also sometimes just transcribe licks. But the idea is to improve my jazz vocabulary, my language. So let's see what we can steal from Jesse Van Ruler. For example, this lick. So it works great over some kind of altered chord going to C minor. It's like almost like a sub 5. Maybe he's thinking D flat. Then there's an E triad, so it's like a diminished, from diminished scale, right? Half whole. I'm thinking like it's an E triad, starting on a D flat, E triad, with that G natural thrown in there. Those are all from the half whole scale, the G half whole or D flat, same thing, right? And then he's kind of targeting the E flat of the C minor. Even though it's a C sharp 9 chord, he's kind of treating it like a C minor. So that's the first lick we're gonna steal. When you transcribe a lot from the same player, you notice that there's certain things they do. I noticed that he plays a lot of augmented triads like that. He does that all the time. That's another thing that he does all the time. Again, you have a D flat triad over a G tonality, which suggests diminished, but the augmented chord is from altered or something. Then he goes into this kind of sequence. That's what it is. So it starts on an upbeat. Again, it plays like a C minor 9 arpeggio, C minor 9 sound over that, which is interesting. That's another thing you learn from doing this. Like, oh, you don't have to think of that C7 sharp 9 as a altered chord. He kind of treats it like a minor chord. When you hear that chord, the minor third kind of trumps the major third. So if I have that chord, if I play C minor over this, Dorian, or even melodic minor, another pattern that he does. And then he goes into a... So he kind of mixes different sounds, but it sounds more like he's playing minor. Okay, so we have lick number 2. We might use that pattern too, but more as an idea rather than a lick. There's another cool thing where he plays this kind of pedal note on beat 4, like a shot, almost like a big band kind of shot. That's another idea that we can take with us. That's another very Jesse Van Ruler sounding thing. We've already seen this thing several times. So he plays this. He plays it over the D, but I think he's kind of thinking G symmetrical diminished. He's kind of just anticipating that sound. That's a very cool lick. Then I like how he resolves it again. C minor, totally C minor. So again, something that I learned from this is that when you have a chord progression like this, everything kind of sounds like some kind of C minor or C blues. A theory book would tell you to play C altered over that first chord and A, some kind of A altered and D altered and G altered. But as I'm sure most of you realize, that's kind of ridiculous. You can do that, but it's going to sound like you're kind of trapped in those scales. When you hear these chords, you hear this C minor blues. Or he plays a lot of like C minor but with a 6. And if you think about it, like the F sharp, the blue note works over that D7. And sometimes he'll play some kind of G altered. So it's almost like he's simplifying the chord progression and thinking C minor or C blues and then G altered or G symmetrical diminished, and going like rather than thinking about each chord. Obviously I don't know what he's thinking, but that's kind of what I take away from it, and even if I'm wrong about that, it still works for me, right? Then he plays a cool whole tone thing. Starts with the whole tone arpeggios, and then he goes into an F major arpeggio and G major and B major. Makes no sense, right? But that B is kind of like an outside arpeggio. That's something I remember learning from Scott Henderson, is that if you're gonna play outside, play something that is kind of inside in and of itself, something strong, like a triad. And he plays this riff. I think he might be doing this in, like playing the same note, because I've seen him do that kind of stuff. Going all the way up to the G like that. I decided not to do that because I don't want to hurt myself. That's a huge stretch. Sometimes you have to make those decisions when you transcribe something. You might end up with something that you realize, I'm not gonna be able to play that. It could be like a huge stretch, or maybe they have more frets on the guitar that you have. Maybe it's a 7-string guitar or something. If you find yourself in that situation, try to simplify it. So I play it here. So it's not the same, but it works for me. At the end, he plays a really crazy thing. We'll see if we can use that one too. So again, G augmented triad to a C sharp minor triad, which you can find in the G half whole. If you have no idea what I'm talking about there, I'm talking about the half whole scale and the triads you can find in that scale. So you might, if you have no idea what that is, you might want to do some research on half whole diminished scales. Again, that E triad over the G. He's mixing again the symmetrical diminished sound with the augmented triad, which is kind of interesting. All right, let's pick a tune. I don't know, let's do a blue bossa. That was the first one. So I'm thinking D flat 7, which is a sub 5 of G. You could even do it on the first chord if you think of that C minor as a C altered chord going to F minor, if you want to go outside. Here we go. That might be a little bit too weird for some of you. Let's try the next lick. It's almost like he's suggesting a whole tone there when he's playing that. Oh, that is whole tone. So that's also something you could throw in there. That was another one, right? I remember that I was taught in jazz school not to use the symmetrical diminished over the G when you're in the minor key, because you get that E natural, which is the major third of the key we're in C minor. But I think it sounds cool. And of course, any lick in the symmetrical diminished you can move. That kind of riff sounding lick, I don't think it's gonna work over the, or not as well over the bossa nova, because it's that's kind of a swing thing. You kind of play like that to create kind of a groove, so it's not really, I wouldn't play like that over a bossa nova. Or this. When he plays that almost like a big band shot, that's also something I would do if I'm playing in a swing context. We had the crazy lick. Let's see if I can throw in that one. Bear with me. Why not? That's another thing he does, that when he plays that thing, it starts diatonic, then he kind of takes it outside. That's another device that you can use. You establish an idea so that the listener hears that phrase, da ba dee da do. That's something. Then you can kind of go outside with the same idea, because you can kind of, when you listen, that idea is more important than that you're playing the correct notes. So by moving an idea symmetrically, you can go outside and come back in. So this solo, this transcription, is going to be on my Patreon page. If you want to support my work, if you like my work, you can become a subscriber of Patreon, and then I can keep doing these videos, and you also get access to PDFs. Sometimes there are PDFs to follow lessons. I make a lesson every other Friday, and I also try to make a Q&A for my Patreons monthly. So some things I learned from this solo was that you can mix sounds from different altered scales. So the augmented triad with the symmetrical diminished. Then there's certain devices he uses with the symmetrical diminished that I'm gonna steal from him. I've already done so, and I've heard him play this in other solos. I've transcribed other solos by him as well. One that you can find on my channel, one of the first videos I made, I think, was one of his solos. Then, by studying this solo, I realized that when you play over these kind of chord progressions, when there's a lot of dominant chords, altered dominant chords in cycles, it's sometimes better to kind of ignore those chords and just treat it like an overall sound. So when you hear this chord progression, you can kind of hear everything in some kind of C minor blues tonality with the altered dominant. Another thing that happens when you transcribe solos is that you kind of subconsciously pick up certain things that these players do rhythmically, and you get a feel for their swing feel. So it's really good to improve your phrasing, to kind of just memorize solos. I have previously made similar videos. There is one where I transcribed a solo by Wolfgang Muthspiel. So I'll link to those in the description below, so if you want to check that out. And as always, thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.